Welcome back to another episode of Leftover Masters. Today we're going to do fantabulous fish cakes. So we are going to take a recipe from Maryland and turn crab cakes into fish cakes. We had some leftover salmon from a couple of days ago. Actually, it was really good. It was some king salmon, and we did a recipe to kind of spice it up a little bit. So there's a little bit of natural spice to it already, but we'll account for that with some of the recipe. Anyway, I think we're ready to go. Let's go scout the fridge, see what we can come up with. So I mentioned the recipe calls for a pound of crab. So I actually weighed this ahead of time just to kind of see what we had, and actually turns out we got just a little over a pound, so that's perfect amount. The other thing that typically would go in crab cakes is some kind of mayo that acts to hold things together, and I actually found a little bit of basil pesto aioli because I was getting a little bit low on mayo, so if I don't have enough of that, I might just add that as well. This recipe calls for 1 egg. And again, these are all things that just kind of bind everything together and hold it together. And also found a couple of onions that I had used for something or other and had a little bit of extra of that. Aside from that, I found some Sriracha Mayo, which actually I just might use as a garnish and add a little bit of flavor as well. I think that's it from the fridge. Mustard. And this stuff, which nobody knows how to pronounce, it looks like Worcestershire, but I think if you look it up, it's Worcestershire, or if you actually lived in Worcestershire, they probably just pronounce it Worcester. So anyway, we're in the Midwest, so we probably call it Worcestershire sauce, which is just completely wrong. So the first thing we're going to do is just put together all of our wet ingredients. So again, this calls for 2 tablespoons of Worcestershire sauce. Worcester sauce. Put that back away. Calls for a couple tablespoons of Dijon mustard. This is actually pretty important. If you really had to, you could sub French's mustard or regular table mustard or something along those lines, but I would try not to do that. Really tastes a lot better with Dijon. And then an egg. And the mayo. So about 1/3 cup of that. So personally, I'm not a big mayo fan, but for this it doesn't really matter. You don't end up tasting it, it just kind of holds it back together. So this isn't something I would normally put on my sandwich anyway, but mixed in, it tastes good and holds everything together. I was going to use this, but as it turns out, I got plenty of mayo, so I'm just going to put this back. So this recipe that I looked up, I actually found this on Delish. It doesn't call for any onions, but I'm going to just throw some in because I found some in the fridge. And sometimes I like to put green onion in things just to get a little extra flavor, but I am going to mince these really well. That way when they're cooking in, so again, now we've got our wet ingredients. Get all that mixed together good. And then we'll just add our fish after that. So again, this recipe called for, you know, salt and pepper and things like that. But as I mentioned, we previously had made this dish. It was called firecracker salmon, which is a recipe I found online. It's actually amazing, but it's got kind of this spicy pepper glaze on it. So I didn't put the pepper and chili paste and things like that that the recipe sometimes will call for, just because I think it's going to have enough. I think it's going to have enough heat with the glaze that we had originally had on the salmon. But if I was making this with fresh salmon or actually with crab, I would definitely add that because I think it adds a lot of flavor, and I like food with a little bit of kick, so I would do that. And again, now we're just going to kind of mix this in. I think it's good to have this a little bit on the chunky side. So don't over mix it, but you just want to make sure that you've got enough of the wet ingredients mixed in so that the filler will hold everything together. So after that, it calls for fresh parsley, but I didn't have any, so we'll just add dried parsley, and I think that's going to taste just fine. Plus it gives it a little bit of color. And then the only thing to do after that is add in the filler, which this recipe calls for panko. A lot of your classic crab cake recipes, especially from out east, and again, we're in the Midwest, so I like to use panko. I did find some leftover saltine crackers because I didn't know if I was going to have enough, but this recipe calls for 3/4 cup and we've got plenty, so no worries. But if you didn't have panko, you could certainly use Ritz crackers, you could use saltine crackers, just about anything that would act as a filler. I mean, if you're really desperate, you could use like corn chips or corn flakes or something like that too, but classically some kind of cracker or panko works, I think, really well for this. So all I did after I added the panko in is mix that in place. And again, I had to use the whisk before, but it was pretty mixed and I didn't want to break up my pieces of salmon too much. So that's all mixed in. It seemed just a little bit on the dry side, so I was worried about sticking together. So I went ahead and added just one more egg. And now it's ready to chill. So this will sit in the refrigerator for a half hour. You could potentially just make it as is, but the cakes hold together if they're a little bit on the chilled side. So I usually make this up ahead of time, chill it for a half hour, and then we'll be ready to shape and form the cakes and then go ahead and cook them. All right, so we're back, and I checked on this after about 20 minutes and it had cooled nicely. So this kind of just, again, makes it a little bit easier to make the patties. So that's all we're going to do with that. The nice thing about this dish, what I really like about it, and I use salmon, but you could do this with just about any leftover fish, or seafood for that matter. So you could do lobster cakes, you could do cod cakes, salmon cakes. I guess we're in Minnesota, so if you wanted to here, you could do walleye cakes or perch cakes for that matter. But either way, it's a nice way to just change up your leftovers so that instead of just throwing your salmon in the microwave, you make a little bit of a different dish. For tonight, it's just gonna kind of complement everything else that we're cooking. And we're going to use it as a little bit of an appetizer. So, all right, they're ready for cooking now. Okay, we're about ready to start cooking. So I just did a little bit of a test to see if our oil was going to be hot enough. So you might notice that I wore my salmon colored shirt today. Not absolutely necessary to coordinate your meal with your shirt color, but sometimes you get bonus points for that. I do have a little exhaust fan going, so hopefully the noise for that isn't too disruptive. Adjust the heat a little bit. While that's cooking on that side, I'm going to serve this with Caesar salad. So I just got that all ready to go kind of during the break while we were waiting for the salmon to cool off. And so use your time, get your dishes done, get the side dish ready. So we're going to serve that on top of it. And again, it's going to be kind of our salad / appetizer course. And then when I take these off the heat, I like to have a paper towel just to soak up extra oil. Otherwise, if you just put it on the plate, then some of that oil can end up just soaking into your dish. So I think it's nice to help keep it nice and crisp. So I'll do a little bit of that. The other two guys going. And then this is just Sriracha Mayo. And again, kind of more of a garnish than anything else. Adds just a little bit of heat and a little bit of color. All right, dinner served. Okay, so that wasn't too bad. We had about 20-25 minutes of downtime. But otherwise, the prep for that maybe took about 10 minutes and about 10 minutes to cook things up and give us time to do some dishes in between. So we're ready to eat. This was salmon cakes, but again, you could use just about anything for this, and there's tons of recipes online. I used a recipe from delish.com, and then I tweaked it, which I always do. So a little of this, a little of this. Sometimes you don't have what you need. Sometimes you get a little extra that you want to use up. And feel free to make those changes. Otherwise, thank you for joining us for another episode of Leftover Master. And don't forget to follow us on Instagram and subscribe to our YouTube channel. We'll see you next time on Leftover Master. Okay. So lettuce and Caesar, right?